This is Talks, where people speak to people about crafting brands and the power of storytelling. Tod,
John,
welcome to Talks.
thank you very much.
It's really great to have you. I must say, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Well, thanks.
We've been knowing each other. We've been working together for the past more than 7 years now.
That's right.
So let me start a bit with your journey. You've started with Crane in the international sales department
That's right. Yeah.
in Tumba in Sweden, and then you've transitioned to become the global marketing director for this brand for the past 10 years,
That's right.
and now based in Boston in the States. When I got to know about the Currency brand, I call it the Currency brand if you allow me, I thought of one thing that immediately comes to mind. Currency is the brand that we carry with us, almost on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through, after this 10-year journey of global marketing? The world is your marketplace, essentially.
Yeah.
Of the branding process that your company goes through when conceptualizing a currency brand for a country.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you, John. It's been great to work with your team and here in Malta, and appreciate your spending a little time with me today. And your question about our business, I'll warn you in advance. I love talking about what Crane Currency does and who we are as a team, a global team. But to your question about the brand, Currency brand, there's no doubt in my mind that really does start with the central bank. We, as you know, and you've been a partner in, we created an event called Public First. It started actually in 2017. And the idea behind that gathering, as the name might imply, was that sort of coincidence with my time at Crane, we were reflecting on the major changes happening in the currency industry. And key among those has been a shift from the central bank perspective to that of the public. It wasn't that long ago, and for a very, very long time, a group of men, primarily men, almost exclusively men, got together and they formed something called a banknote. It was largely ink on paper, and then this was issued into the public domain. What we've seen really over the last 20 years or so is really a radical change of the central banks recognizing that cash is a public good, and it ought to really reflect the nation and the people of the nation, the culture, flora, fauna, these types of things. So I think, when I think about the brand, if you will, and that's a fine way to describe it, we think about the public first. And our gateway to accessing that, if you will, is through our customer, the central bank.
With your cue, I'm going to jump to a question I was meant to ask you later.
Okay.
But for me, when I look at currency is a flora, fauna, it's a symbol of a national identity.
Yeah.
How powerful as a marketer is storytelling in bringing this national symbol to life in public education, in rollout, in go-to-market? How powerful is brand storytelling?
Yeah, now you've hit upon a couple of things as I heard it. One was the physicality of in this case, the banknotes themselves and what imagery is featured on that. And then there's additional technology, which is really defining what banknotes are today, but we can come back to that in a little bit. The second part of your question leapt, I think rightly now, into the public education, engagement, putting active energy and a voice to the banknotes. Now, we look at banknotes as, in a way, the physical manifestation of what the central bank is wanting to say. But it's saying on behalf of the nation. Now we're seeing, and I feel this is the concept of the modern banknote, it's not just the highly technical and secure product, it's also what the central bank's saying about those products. I think we're seeing now a recognition by central banks that they have to lean in to that storytelling, using more thoughtful approaches to connecting with the public, when, and that's not if, but when they either upgrade or come out with a new banknote, a little bit of promotion of that is, I think, becoming not just helpful, but very necessary.
Do you see more of an integrated marketing communications approach now that central banks are adopting to roll out the product?
Yeah.
If you can call it the product, because it's a rolling out of a product, right?
Yeah. Again, you can imagine in an innovative company like Crane Currency, we do quite a lot of thinking about highly technical products, which are in their own domain successful, but then you have to think about the commercial success of that product. I think banknotes are becoming the same way for central banks. You can have the best banknotes in the world, but it would serve many central banks very well to reach out to the public and explain why are they necessary and reinforce the fact that they are public good. That cash, modern banknotes are indeed an important pillar of the modern economy. Even I would say especially in the face of rising digital payments and that sort of thing. So to your point, if you want to call it the brand, that's fine. But I think an exercise in brand promotion and education is important. And I think we see that in our relationships with central banks today. We're doing more and more assistance, discussion as a talking partner, not just about the technical physicality of the banknotes, but then what is their launch day looking like?
Okay, kind of D-Day for the big day.
Absolutely right. Is that a celebration or is it a point of anxiety? we think
it's
that
probably a bit of both, is it?
Well, it could be. It could be. I mean, a little bit of nervousness on the big day is, I think, healthy. But when we are asked or invited to counsel with a central bank on when that day is often 12 months into the future, let's say, right? Mm-hmm. Let's start talking about what that day is going to look like. Yeah. Who are the stakeholders? Mm-hmm. How do we reach them? How do we make it really a day of celebration where that calling card of the nation is not just welcomed, but it's anticipated and really embraced for use and circulation in the environment.
So one of the things that always fascinated me about currency and about Crane Currency is the fact that your market is the world.
Yeah.
So essentially, your target audience are the continents, the various central banks, the countries that will either want to launch a currency or a new denomination, so on and so forth. And this brings me to the concept of adaptability and agility. Because obviously different markets, different countries have different needs, different communication techniques, different public education rollouts, so on and so forth. How big is the marketing role in playing with the currency team of that particular country? First of all, to understand the country, to understand the needs of the country, they always question the why. And number two is the what in terms of the rollout. How big is adaptability and agility? Because you could be moving from LATAM to Asia to Africa within a few months.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you're making that distinguishing between the great diversity we see in our customers. There are very small central banks. Of course, there are very large ones, and their resources from which they can draw can vary greatly. We've had a partnership, unbroken 147 years of supplying, for example, the U.S. Treasury Department and their banknote printer, the U.S. Bureau of Engraving and Printing, which produces the Federal Reserve note. The Federal Reserve, of course, is the central bank of the United States. They don't need a lot of help from Crane in advertising the next generation of U.S. currency. But even in that particular example, our dialogue with their teams about the technology that's being introduced into the banknotes is helpful to their communications plan about what they think, in this case of US dollar, a global user base would and should need to know and understand through dozens of languages. That's quite a rarefied example.
And I know you were personally involved in that.
Yeah, I had the real honor and privilege to be one of the points of contact within Crane, when in fact the U.S. Treasury was moving to the inclusion of the motion switch security thread or as the US government renamed it, the 3D security ribbon. And they renamed that precisely because that was a phrase they felt would be easy to translate and understand across dozens of languages as they rolled out that new currency.
That's adaptability itself.
Yeah. But let's take a much smaller central bank as an example of how I think branding is becoming important. Just recently, March 31st, actually, the two nations of Curacao and St. Martin, who share a central bank, launched their banknotes and coins. This was a central bank that came to Crane in the middle of COVID. There, I've said it now, in 2020. And when Crane was showing its concepts, its designs for their new banknotes and hoping to win that business, it was the Crane design team that invited the Crane currency marketing team to join that presentation. We had just done a campaign with the Central Bank of Aruba.
Also in the Caribbean.
In the Caribbean. So small island nation and facing a bit of a challenge. You mentioned the why. And I would think that in many cases, people aren't asking the question as to why we need banknotes and coins, but they may ask, why do we need new banknotes and coins? And this was a question that was on the minds of the Central Bank of Curacao and St. Martin. So when we began to talk about their technical product, the banknotes, we also began to talk about the stakeholders, the public, the business community, the tourist community, and to understand what do we need to do or help the central bank do in terms of explaining the why. Why are we moving from an old Antilles guilder to a new Caribbean guilder? What's driving that change politically, governmentally? And then from there, what should this look like and how should it reflect the two nations, in fact? And that led to the CBCS, the Central Bank of Curacao St. Martin, really working with Crane on developing a communications plan that was 2 years in its duration, identifying the objectives of the communications plan, who were the stakeholders, how did we feel was best to reach them, the different sort of media channels that you've already alluded to, and then building out and applying a lot of creativity to sending that message, and importantly, drawing inspiration from the design of the banknotes and the coins. So really reinforcing through the educational campaign, the engagement campaign, those elements that in time the public would see reflected in their banknotes. And that's been really tremendously successful for the central bank. I can tell you that when I was there, when they revealed the notes, now this was some months before they were physically introduced, immediately we saw businesses beginning to adopt the imagery of the banknotes into their own business communications and advertisements. They did it in a very respectful way, but it was a fantastic endorsement.
That's ownership, product ownership.
That's product ownership, yeah. I mean, when we say the calling card of the nation, the banknotes are the calling card of the nation, we saw an immediate adoption of this imagery to promote businesses that resonate with both the tourism industry and the domestic economy. Things that they're proud to talk about that reflect their work and their life and many tourist visits into these two nations, all through the communication of the banknotes, which in turn reinforced the very concrete messages that the public needed to know. When are the banknotes coming? For how long are the old banknotes going to be used in shops?
In circulation.
In circulation, yeah. So it was just a wonderful exercise. I give them a lot of credit. It's this very small central bank, but they started early, thinking about what are the important messages.
So it's of be prepared.
Exactly, yeah. Their brand is the Caribbean Guilder, and they really started early so that when it came to the issuance day, March 31st, it was indeed a celebration.
At Concept Stadium, as you know, we focus a lot on crafting brands for people.
Yeah.
But equally important is the element of customer journey. And I think what you're alluding to is this partnership that I think every brand should experience in its rollouts. The various stakeholders that come together for the one goal.
Yeah.
What's the level of engagement? So you've mentioned business engagement.
Right.
But what's the level of a public education engagement you would like to see in more of these rollouts? Because obviously you've got a plan for these.
Right. I think plan's the key word.
Okay.
For central banks, arguably, one of the more stressful things that they're tasked with is the design and issuance of a new banknote. Again, I already mentioned that it's probably their loudest form of communication. That the entire nation is going to become aware of. And if we think about that, finding the right supplier to produce your banknotes and your currency, selecting the correct security features, competing that work, that's stressful in its own right. Then let's say you have that technically successful product. Then you have to launch it. It has to be in a way of commercial success. So I think the planning for that, we always encourage central banks to start early.
Okay.
I really want to come back to that. Think about the trends, right? Think about, we've already alluded to the digital payment systems, the uptick in that. That can reinforce or raise the question again, why? Why are we investing in new banknotes? I haven't used banknotes in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I don't carry banknotes. You're seeing this in many economies. I think the central bank has to be aware of the fact and tailor its approach to communications with that in mind. It also, I would suggest, be aware of other trends, like in social media. Social media is a fantastic platform, unfortunately, many times used for criticism rather than praise, right? Well, then, with this in mind, a year out before you're going to launch your currency, well, what is our strategy? What can our strategy be for reaching people with the positivity, right, of a new banknote, and why it's necessary, and why, as a social good, it's important that it stay modern and stay secure. So it really comes back to that. Start talking about it early. Start planning early.
So you mentioned digital. You've mentioned, and we are in a world of, I have to ask this question if you allow me. We are in a world of digital currencies. We are in a world of cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
I was working with you this week and I noticed the sticker on your laptop.
Yes.
Which says, cash doesn't crash.
Yeah. I've lost a lot of PowerPoints through the years to computer crashes.
How do you integrate this element of messaging in a world which is now dominated by the digital space, including in the payments industry?
Yeah. Well, we think more and more about that.
What's the longevity of the currency brand, essentially?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And it's funny. We're here in beautiful Malta, Crane's beautiful facility, and we're really busy. We have a lot of central banks who are demanding from us, if you will, more and more currency. But it's actually a difficult business to plan for because the demand can come suddenly, and it can come somewhat sporadically, or can feel like that to us. There's no denying what you've just said, that digital payments are on the rise, and then the adoption of those payments and the balance between digital and cash payments, that ratio is so different between all of our different customer mix. So when I'm confronted with that question, I have to take a little pause and say, what are the examples I would draw from? I think some of it, if I can borrow some phrases from central banks to respond to your question, might be helpful. For example, Mark Gould from the U.S. Federal Reserve System. He was, I think, very memorably at an industry event, and he was asked very much the same question. He said, well, when we look at modern architecture, fantastic new skyscrapers, office buildings, the first thing they always build on a construction site, if you pass by, is a staircase. You always need that at the core of that construction, something that's dependable and durable and will always work in a time of crises. And I thought that was a fantastic,
it's a great parallel.
Yeah, great parallel. Some of the observers of societal changes, cash in particular, another author, Brett Scott, author of Cloud Money, a good read. I would recommend you read it.
Thank you.
He likened modern banknotes to the bicycle.
Oh.
In terms of the payment system. Payment system is being dominated by digital, third-party, for-profit payment systems, typically. But alongside of that, and quite in harmony with that, is cash. And I've often reflected that when I travel to Stockholm, Sweden, where we make international banknote paper. It's a very cash-light society dominated by bicycle commuters.
That's very true, actually.
In a northern climate, you wouldn't think that's a great place to ride a bike, but the modern lifestyle in an urban setting favors a bicycle. And I think there's a lot of parallels there with the use of cash.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And I think we see this across our different central banks. Curacao and St. Martin, the example I previously used, has an interesting mix of digital, US dollars, euro, and the Caribbean guilder.
Oh,
and
okay.
they work together very harmoniously.
Within the same market.
Absolutely right.
Fantastic.
Yeah. It's really driven, I mentioned public first, public choice, and we see that. Great service to the public.
Tod, my last question to you would be the intertwining of... So since I got involved with Crane Currency, I realized that there are some fundamental pillars in the production of a banknote.
Sure.
The design element,
Yeah.
the security features,
Yeah.
the technology that I know Crane is extremely strong about,
Yeah.
and the product itself.
Yeah.
Is there a balancing act? Is there a magic formula? Whilst preserving the power of branding and storytelling, whilst keeping in mind the other important considerations for a public good like
Yeah.
currency. Security is critical. Technology is important to achieve that.
Yeah, let's be clear, security drives banknote design. That's what drives it. As a societal good, the protection of that most basic and universally accepted form of payment are the banknotes. The modern banknote, I think I would respond to a couple things that you said. You mentioned customization. That defines the modern banknote. The storytelling, the messaging that the central bank wants to communicate today, as I've already mentioned, wants to reach the broadest audience in a nation. And to do that, you really want to customize. This leads to the security features being selected that must also be customized for each central bank, even for each banknote, each denomination. And the trick with that is, and here's where I think Crane Currency has demonstrated probably the most secure and easy to use security features with Crane's micro-optics. They're eminently customizable, very, very complex. We're 20 years now into innovating micro-optic security features. They've become more and more complex. The design software to create those couldn't be run 20 years ago on the computer systems that we were using. That's how far we've advanced. But in the end, they have to be easy. Very easy for the public to use. The public we don't expect the public to wake up every morning and say, what a fantastic banknote.
Yeah.
We expect them to glance at them and know instantly with a high degree of confidence, it's real.
And it's secure.
And and fit for use. So some of the tools that Crane work, we've mentioned the designers. I think Crane's design team is world-class. And it's world-class for a couple of reasons, not just the talent, the collection of talent and skills, the experience, but the fact that the micro-optic technology has influenced the designers. And those designers have influenced and sort of elevated the art of micro-optic security features. So we've got this sort of unique relationship with technology.
Between creative and security. Okay.
Which drives innovation. And that drives the value to the central banks. Really fantastic. Another leg, which has really come to the banknote industry rather late, is perception science. Crane Currency is really one of the few, if only, companies that I'm aware of that goes out, uses an independent cognitive science leader in the field to assess how easy, how secure are the security features that we're innovating and presenting to central banks. Now, product perception has been used in consumer goods for decades. It's only now being applied to banknotes very, very recently. And that's something that we heavily endorse. We can say to a central bank, this is great. Crane Currency can actually supply evidence, science-based evidence that, in fact, we've tested with the public. Not only is it difficult to produce, but the public gets it. They can understand it. They can authenticate it very, very quickly, within a fraction of a second.
So it's almost like the A/B testing of currency.
Absolutely right.
Call it that.
Absolutely right. Yeah, yeah.
Fantastic. So can I just thank you for your time? Thank you for giving us some of your time during your visit to Malta. Thank you for hosting us in this beautiful customer experience center.
You're very welcome.
And thank you for sharing your knowledge with us.
It's a pleasure working with you, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, John. Thanks.
Thank you, Tod.
Pleasure.